Today I'm delighted to welcome Tom Chigbo, Senior Organiser from Leeds Citizens, part of Citzens UK, who will talk to us today about the steps we can take as young people to set up our own social action group.
Hello Tom, and hello everyone listening at home. All right then, so what I'm going to share with you today are 5 tips for starting your social justice group. And these are tips based on our experience of community organising with Citzens UK. Community organising is a particularly effective way of making change. But I think that your social justice groups can really find value in a community organising approach, because as well as helping you make change, it will help you grow and strengthen your group so that it's sustainable. And it's also a really good expression of the values of Catholic social teaching in practice. So if you're looking for a way to, yes, make some change, but also make sure that your group lasts and is sustainable, and also you want to embody the teaching, the Catholic social teaching curriculum, then I think this is the sort of approach that you need to take. And I've boiled it down to some kind of 5 key points. Okay, so let's try the first one. So lots of people get involved in social justice campaigning and join groups because there's an issue that they care about. There's something that they're passionate about. You might be watching this thinking, I really care about the environment and climate change. Or you might be thinking, I'm really concerned about poverty in my neighborhood. All of those issues are important, and they're probably a big motivation for why you're involved. However, we make a mistake when we put those issues first before thinking about the people that are going to be needed to help make the change. So my first step is for your group to focus on building relationships. I've included a quote from Margaret Mead on the slide. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So the first thing that you need to think about before you get into the issues is actually, who is that group? And how do I build and strengthen that group as much as possible? And most of your power will at this stage will come from having strong relationships between people in the group and strengthening the members of the group's ability to build relationships with people outside the group. And there are 2 things that I think your group could do from day one at your first meeting and start to do more regularly. The first thing is to use something which we call rounds to start your meetings. And I think your first meeting might just be this. The rounds is an opportunity for every person in the group to answer a simple question that is personal and political. That means it's something about yourself, your motivations, or your background, and the issues that you care about and why you care about it. And all you need to do is basically just go around in a circle and give each person 2 or 3 minutes to answer that question. What is it that motivates you? What do you care about? Why is it that you have a passion for social justice? Whatever the question is, you can craft it yourselves, but just give everybody a bit of time to answer that question together. And when you do that, what you'll find is you'll gain a bigger understanding and develop a relationship between people. And you'll see where your personal story or your motivations connect with another person's. And that will help strengthen your group and give you a common sense of purpose. The second thing that you should focus on is having one-to-one conversations. First with people in your group, and then secondly with people outside your group. And these aren't sort of quick chats about the weather or football or how you got to the meeting. These are simple conversations where you share a little bit about your personal story, your life story, what it is you care about, and what ambitions you have. And if you can get each person in your initial group of people to commit to having one of these one-to-one conversations with everybody else in the group, that will give you a really, really solid foundation for your group to ensure that people stick together, because you actually have a really deep understanding of each other and you have strong relationships. And in all of our community organising campaigns, we always start with these one-to-one conversations first, before we get into the issue. And so that's what I recommend you do. So after you've started building relationships, you then need to think about building your power. And power is an odd word, and for some people a difficult and controversial word. But community organising teaches us that if you want to make change and you're serious about making change and you don't just want to do lots of talking, then you have to have power. And the more power that you have, the more change you can make. And even as a young person, you have some potential power that you can build, but it takes a little bit of effort for you to build that power. I've included a quote from Martin Luther King, the civil rights activist, who sums it up really, really well. He says, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." If you are setting up a social justice group, then what you're aiming to achieve is power correcting everything that stands against love. So you absolutely need power as a group. And in a way, it doesn't really matter how great your ideas are, how passionate you are about all sorts of issues. If you don't have power, then you won't be able to make change. And here are two ways in which you can start to build your power as your group. So the first is for your group to run something which I'm calling a listening campaign. A listening campaign is just a dedicated period of time where instead of preaching about the cause that you care about, you spend time talking to people in your community, in your school, in your setting, about what it is that they are passionate about. It's really useful if you have a single question that everybody is answering together in your conversation. So I've included a couple of examples here. What makes you mad, sad, and glad about our neighbourhood? What's the biggest injustice faced by people in our community? So members of your social justice group, your task is to go out and have conversations with people who are not in the social justice group about this, following this question. And that builds your power because it helps you develop relationships with other people who might join your group because they've had something sparked in them about the injustices that they see around them. It helps build ownership for the agenda that you do work on. Rather than saying, I'm running a group for people who are interested in the environment, and then only the people interested in the environment join my group. What we're saying is everybody, social justice is relevant to everybody, and we're really interested in all the different elements of social justice that connect with you personally. And you have the ability to shape what this group does. So the listening campaign is vital. The second thing that you can do to start building your power is something which we call power analysis. And that's a little bit of time as a group thinking and planning to understand where the leaders are in your community or in your setting. And I differentiate between two types of power analysis. The first one is an internal power analysis. And put simply, that's just a time where your group sits down and thinks about who are the decision makers and key leaders in our community. Now, in a school setting, what I mean by that is literally who are the fellow students who are the key decision makers and leaders in our community of students? And who are the staff in our school that are the key decision makers and leaders and power holders? And let's have an honest conversation about that. Some people, it'll be really obvious because they've got a special job, they've got a special title. They're the head of year, for example. They're the captain of the football team. But other people might still be leaders or decision makers, but they don't have a special job or a special title. It might be that Julia is somebody who everybody listens to. Or David is the kind of person who, if he joins something, 10 other people will join. So when you're doing your power analysis, think honestly, but also think openly. It's not just the people who've got special roles or special titles. But you can also do a power analysis that's external. So it could be about your town, your city, or your community. Write down the names of the people who are the key decision makers and leaders. Find out who those people are. You might have a town council or a city council. There might be councillors that are assigned to your individual ward. There might be businesses that are really influential and powerful in your neighbourhood. There are people outside of your individual group that have an influence over life in your community, in your neighbourhood. And you should write them down and identify them. They will be very, very useful later. So those first two steps, build relationship and build power, they're about your foundations of your social justice group. And it is really worth investing time in doing this before you get into the specific social justice issues. It will help your group go a lot further and have a lot more impact. And we find in Leeds Citizens, all of our successful campaigns have come out of these kind of actions first. So tip number 3 is you need to move from problems to issues. And I think the best way for your social justice group to do that is to organise some kind of meeting or event where you make a decision after you've completed your listening campaign and you've done your analysis. And at that event, I suggest that you spend some time sharing some feedback and some testimonies. That means stories from the listening campaign. So hopefully you will have all had lots of conversations about what motivates people or what's making people angry or what injustices really get to people. And you should spend some time just sharing those stories. Who did you hear from? What did you hear? What moved you most? What was widely felt or what was deeply felt? And then as a group, you need to make a collective decision to focus on a limited number of issues. If you talk to lots of people, you will identify lots and lots of problems with the community or the world around you. And as a group, you have to be really clear-headed and understand that you're only going to be able to address or take action on a limited number of themes. And you will do much better if you can focus on a very, very small number and apply all of your energy to that small number of issues, rather than trying to be open to every single social justice issue. But I've used these words, problems and issues, and I use them advisedly because there is a difference between problems and issues. And you need to make sure that you're working on a specific issue rather than a big problem. And this is one of the main pitfalls that social justice groups or organizations get into. They get stuck with problems and they don't focus on issues. Whenever you focus on an issue, you're much more likely to take action that's meaningful and successful. And so let me just break that down a little bit. What's the difference between a problem and an issue? A problem is something that's really big and ongoing and complicated. It's general terms and it's abstract. And if you get into problems, they're really kind of overwhelming. Problems only lead to more talking, basically. Whereas when you break down a problem into a small and tangible issue, an issue is something that's immediate and simple and specific. It's small and concrete, and crucially, it's winnable. When you're in the realm of issues, that leads to decisions and actions. And you'll notice this when you're trying to talk to people about your social justice group or even invite people to get involved. And you'll see this in terms of how they react to you. If you ask that person to join your social justice group and you start naming all the big social justice problems around the world, I don't know, environmental destruction, inequality, poverty, racism, sexism, these are big problems. And if you ask people to join a group to address those problems, you will only attract a minority of people, because people will, in the back of their minds, be thinking, we're not going to solve sexism with our little social justice group. Well, yeah, I appreciate what you're thinking, and it's really good that you agree, you want to take action, but really, you're not going to end racism with your group. And because that's going on in the back of their mind, they're less likely to get involved in your social justice group. Whereas if you focus on specific and tangible issues, people can see that there's an action to take and there's a potential for change. So if you ask people, instead of focusing on sexism, but to say, actually, I'm launching a campaign to ensure that our city council puts up a statue of a woman alongside all the statues of men that they have in the town hall, then that's a very specific and tangible thing, and the person you're speaking to can envisage how that change can be made and how a success can be achieved. So here's an example of a problem that has been successfully broken down into issues. So racism is the problem, and right at the center of the screen you can see Rosa Parks sat on the bus. Famously, Rosa Parks took a stand against racism by refusing to move to the back of the bus, which was what Black people had to do in the United States of America in the 50s and 60s. Due to the racist society there and the segregation in all forms of life. And lots of Black people were tired of this because it was disrespectful. It also meant that the buses would get full, so they'd have to wait for a second bus because they couldn't sit at the front, and it was a real pain. Now, that action was deliberately designed and created, and it didn't address the whole problem of racism. It was specifically looking at the rules for buses. So the problem of racism was cut down into a specific intangible issue, which was the rules for sitting on buses. And that led to a successful campaign and a win on that issue. And by winning on buses, that gave people the confidence and the ability to win on other issues, leading to bigger problems being solved and things like the Voting Rights Act being passed later on. But if they'd started their campaign trying to address the whole problem of racism and keeping it vague, they would not have built up enough confidence and victories to address the big problem. Something more contemporary are all the pictures around it. We worked with some young people who were concerned about racism, and when we challenged them to cut the problem into a specific and tangible issue, the issue that they came up with was the way that migrants and Muslim people are being portrayed in particular newspapers in the media. That's what their specific issue was. And they'd go to the shop and they'd see all these newspapers with all these horrible and hateful messages, and that's what made those young people angry. So the action that we generated was to try and encourage those newspapers to change their headlines and their approach by convincing companies that advertise in those papers to stop advertising in them. And so we ran actions that focused on particular companies. And so you can see the action that we ran at Lego, where we got ourselves some Lego costumes, and then we went en masse to the Lego headquarters to try and convince them to pull their advertising from certain newspapers, including the Daily Mail, who promoted various racist messages. And we were successful. And so these companies like Lego, but also the Body Shop and others, stopped advertising in these papers because of the messages that they were sending out. So racism is a big problem, and it's complex, and it's got so many forms that it can be overwhelming for people. But if the conversation is about something specific and tangible and smaller, then you're more likely to get people to join in. You're more likely to see a successful win. You're more likely to attract other people to join in and build the confidence to tackle bigger things. So you've built relationships, you've built your power, you've identified some specific and tangible issues. Your next step as a group is you need to take a public action. And your public action should be aimed at getting a specific reaction from a decision maker who's got some power over the issue that you want to take. And I'll briefly share the story of Ishmael, who was a sixth former that I did some work with a few years ago, who followed this process at his sixth form, and it worked really, really well. So Ishmael ran a social justice group through his student union's social justice group, and they identified work experience as the specific issue. The issue was local organizations in the neighborhood weren't giving young people from his college the opportunity to do work experience. And it was really hard as a young person to find work experience. They went to a meeting with a company called Allianz, who had an office near the school. And they were really disappointed in what they heard. They heard that Allianz were thinking of leaving the neighborhood because they didn't think that they'd get any good employees from the local community. The chairman said, they see a large drift out of Croydon, which was the neighbourhood, of the middle class who've traditionally been our employees. If they're not here in 2 or 3 years' time, we won't be here. So if there aren't enough middle class people in our neighbourhood, then we're going to leave because we don't really think that the rest of the population are good enough for our jobs. And when Ishmael put his hand up at the meeting and asked, what about giving work experience to young people from my school? The chief executive said, if I give work experience placements, I give them to the children of my friends. I can't give you anything. So the young people were really angry and disappointed by that situation. So they took a specific action to get a specific reaction from Allianz. They wanted Allianz to meet with them and agree to start giving work experience opportunities to young people from their school. And the action they took was, one lunchtime, everybody made sure that they turned up, dressed really smartly in their suits, and they bring their CVs to school. And they organised for as many students as possible at the same time to line up outside Allianz and one by one hand in their CV to the reception and say, I'm here to find out about working at Allianz. Can you please pass on my CV to the chief executive? And because they got hundreds of people doing that, they got a little bit of media attention. And very quickly, Allianz rang up the school to say, we really need to have a meeting with you and with Ishmael to talk about this work experience issue. And then the following year, Allianz created a scheme where local young people were invited in and provided with work experience at the company. So if they had, it's one thing for them to have identified work experience as an important issue, but until they took public action outside, designed to get a specific reaction from a decision maker, then their social justice movement wouldn't have meant anything. But because they've taken that action, they've been able to contribute towards a positive change. And yes, that's really good for the local community, and it's a great positive social justice impact. But also, it tells everybody else at school that it's worth joining this social justice group. Because if you join this group, we take action and stuff happens and you can change something. And somebody who's sat there thinking, oh, well, work experience isn't the thing that I care about, but I care about a different thing, like the environment. They'll have the confidence to say, well, maybe if I come to this group, we can get something done about it. So that's taking public action. And then the final tip, and this applies for every action, every meeting, everything you do with your social justice group, is to build in a habit of evaluation. And I think a simple way to do this is to set aside 5 minutes at the end of every meeting or every event that you run as a social justice group for an evaluation, where you ask 4 or 5 key questions to everybody in the room. The first thing is feelings. So how do people feel about this meeting, this event? So many times we put on meetings where people feel bad. They feel bored, they feel a bit ignored, they don't understand what's happening. And because we don't let people share this, and we're not brave enough to hear it publicly, we don't learn and people drift away from our groups. So give people a moment, and you can do it very, very quickly by just going around the room at the end of the meeting and ask people to say one word that sums up how they're feeling right now. The second thing for you to ask about is the logistics. So did we organize this meeting well enough? Did you get the paperwork or the materials that you needed in advance? Could you hear? Could you see? Was the room too hot? Things like that can stop people from enjoying the experience and turn them off from the group. So make sure that you make a note of how you're doing on that. The most important thing, with the lightning bolt next to it, is turnout. You should get into a habit of counting at every single meeting how many people attend, because part of your power comes from the number of people who are participating in your group. And the turnout is a visible demonstration of how much power you have. And how strong the leadership is of people in the group. And if you think the turnout is not large enough for you to have the power to change what you want to change, then you need to think about a plan for increasing your turnout and getting more people to attend. The most effective way to get people to attend and participate is through the conversations and relationships that you have built. Ask people about what reactions you had to the meeting. So if you've had a meeting, there was probably a purpose, a reaction you were seeking from the people who attend the meeting. Or if you're doing a public action, there's probably a purpose, a reaction you are seeking from the decision maker or the powerful person that you're trying to get to do something. You should name that reaction and talk about whether you achieved that reaction. You should identify people who did well. Maybe this is a meeting where somebody has spoken for the first time, or somebody's given a presentation about an issue that they care about. Or maybe there's a group of people who've worked really hard to make sure that 10 new people have joined the group. Take a moment in your evaluation to recognize people who've done well and congratulate them for doing it. And then finally, make an agreement about what the next steps are. Maybe you've already got another meeting that you need to have. Maybe there's an action that needs to take place. Maybe you're going to commit to do some listening with some people. Make sure those next steps are agreed and understood by everybody. So they're the five tips, put simply. Build relationships, build your power, move from problems to issues, take public action, and make sure that you evaluate every meeting. I think that if you can take these 5 tips into your social justice group and embed them into all of your meetings and the way that you work, then you are much more likely to have success, but also you're much more likely to generate a group that's sustainable, that's popular, and is dynamic. At Leeds Citizens, our expertise is in helping groups of people to do this all the time. Helping people to form groups, develop leadership, take public action for social justice. So if people are interested in this, there are lots and lots of ways to get in touch with us through Facebook, through our website. We're very active on Twitter as well, and you can email us with questions and ideas too. We like to work with all sorts of different types of organisations, so schools, churches, community groups. So regardless of what setting you're working in, there's a way in which we can work together on different campaigns.